it does the following things. As you move out of the forest, and as you begin to become part of the 5th and 6th scheduled regimes, you first lose touch with the forest. That has 3 consequences. First, the language of your workplace, which is the office that you go to, right? Which is English or Hindi that you learn, the computers that you work with, depending on where you're positioned in the employment scale, your language of work is very different from the language of your custom and your culture. And what is the language of your culture and custom? It is folklore, it is dance, it is music, it is mythology, it is rituals. There is no link between the two. And third, this might also impact the language of your everyday life. Because you are dealing not with the realities of forest, you are now dealing with the realities of finance, of banking, of ration cards, of police licensing, in order that you may exist. So these people lose that imagination that comes with the forest. And those who continue to live in the forest, for them all the 3 languages are embedded in each other. The language of work, the language of home, the language of everyday life is embedded with each other because they are talking about the same set of materials, the same set of ideas in all the 3 spheres. What is the difference between these 2 imaginations? To put it very, very simply, I think there is a very big change, there is a very big difference in an imagination where you are living with living things. So imagine that your house is in the middle of a forest where there are animals, where there are plants, where mud is alive, everything is alive. And you imagine yourself, your imagination in a place like this room where everything is non-alive. It's not dead, but it is non-living matter. Right? It makes a substantial difference in the kind of imagination that you have. You are dealing with living things all the time. Your house is built and it dissolves. Here your house is built and it doesn't dissolve. This is a very important difference which I would like to talk about in order to emphasize that these are 2 radically different imaginations. When an Adivasi builds his house in the forest and he abandons the forest reclaims the house. It's quite obvious. When in the city we make the house, it may not be reclaimed by nature. You may have an archaeological monument lasting for several hundred years, maybe several thousand years. It is a very, very substantial difference. Why? Because here is a society that does not believe in history that is embedded in archaeology. There are no archaeological monuments in that society to give them sense of time and space. How would this society be if all the archaeological monuments were taken away from them? What would happen to a sense of time and history? We will get demolished totally. We will completely be in a spin, we will go completely mad. What is the sense of time and history? What is the sense of the world that comes to a society where there are buildings, but there is no archaeological sense of history? There is no archaeology to determine the sense of time and space. Compared to a society in which archaeology is a very important determinant of how you think of a time and space. This is the imagination which an Adivasi has, which a tribal doesn't have. I think this is very important. Are there any Adivasis left in this world today? Where do we go look for them? And most of us are of the view that there are none. I think there are several of them. They will be few, but I think those few are on the frontier. In the sphere of knowledge, the minority is the frontier. The minority is the one who does the experiment. It is not, everybody doesn't do the experiment. Right? Knowledge is not produced by mass production of experiments. Knowledge is produced by those 2 people who dare to think of a new idea, experiment with it and die with it. And Adivasis are on the frontier. There is another reason why we need to look at Adivasis on the frontier. Today, the criteria for development is not only GDP. It is whether you are in debt and whether your carbon footprint is 0 or not. Right? And I think Adivasi society can be looked at as one society where carbon footprint is 0 and there is no debt. If we were to use this parameter and redraw the hierarchy of societies, I would say Adivasis are on top and America is at the bottom, because America does not sign the carbon protocol and it is the most in debt. If you look at the debt clock, it is deep, deep, deep red. Now, does that mean that we become Adivasis? Certainly not. But certainly we can learn from them. And what is it that we want to learn from them is something that I want to share with you now. We can learn from them that deforestation is not about just the loss of forest cover. Deforestation is a much deeper phenomenon. From their point of view, deforestation is the deforestation of the mind. Now what does that mean? It means that if you look at your mind as a world in which there are many objects of nature, right? There is a very good painting done by a Latin American painter. I wish I could have shown that. So the painting shows a man and a big circle over his head. And in this circle, all that he's thinking about has been drawn. Everything. And all that it contains is consumer goods and nothing else. Deforestation means that in that worldview, you have no place for a tree. And the proof of that is, in our everyday lives, if we were to calculate how much space and how much time do we give for trees, it is not even 1/10 of a day, not even 1/100th of a day. That is the deforestation of the mind. And that is what deforestation is. Because that deforestation corresponds to the actual destruction of plants in the natural world. They also say that deforestation has another very important dimension. We are not only concerned with the number of species that we've lost, we are also concerned with the potentiality of Earth to have been totally destroyed. In other words, the fertility of the Earth has been totally destroyed, and in today's language I would say that is destruction of potentiality. And this is a very important concept that I want to emphasize. Potentiality is not to be understood as opposed to that which is possible. Potentiality is eternally potential. The moment we actualize it, it ceases to be potential. That is actual. This is a idea that's not mine. It's an idea that has been developed by Amben in his book called Potentiality. It's a very difficult book to read. But I think the central idea of the book is potentiality is eternally potential. Now, if you destroy this potentiality, that's deforestation. A friend of mine who's a Gandhian farmer put it very well to describe potentiality. Somebody asked him, what do you want to leave behind in this world? What is your contribution to the next generation? He said, I want to leave 1 inch of topsoil. That's what I want to contribute to the next world. And it is a very difficult task. What all social engineering, what all politics, what all economics you will have to do, what all philosophy you will have to create that 1 inch of topsoil is, at least to me, a huge task. And I think what he's contributing to is potentiality. I think that is the meaning of potentiality that we're looking at. So, where does the potentiality lie? How would the forest dwellers define potentiality? It comes to us as part of their cultivation practice. And I want to say here that shifting cultivation is a wrong way of understanding what the forest dwellers do. That is a colonial way of understanding the practice. And we have continued to destroy that practice by continuing to discuss it under the title of shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation only talks about the plot in which the crop is being sown. But there is only 1/4 of the story. Very briefly, a shifting cultivation cycle varies depending on the number of plots you have. So you move from plot 1 to X number of plots. Let's say if you have, in the time that I went, everybody had 28 plots. So you move from plot 1 to plot 28. And while 1 plot is being cultivated, 28 plots are lying fallow. Actually, forest is regenerating on the 28 plots. So actually, shifting cultivation is wrong. It is the cultivation of a forest. That is what is happening in shifting cultivation. You are actually nurturing a forest, because that is a large amount of time that you are creating for forest regeneration. And believe me, not all forest is cut. The forest that is not cut is called the sacred forest. And that sacred forest is where Mother Earth lives. Mother Earth is not just a metaphor, is not just a simple literary way of describing the properties of Earth. It stands for a very important principle. And the principle is that it describes to you the other side of labor. If you were to understand Marx's theory of labor, Marx says very clearly that you can only own the products of your labor. What Adivasis are telling us is, what about the products that are not a product of your labor? You can't own them. And that is earth, that is nature. How do you relate to that labor which is not your own? That is the crux of this practice. We call it common property resources, but common property resources does not capture the spirit. Because common property resources does not talk about potentiality. It is talking about territoriality, it is talking about land ownership, but a different mode of sharing. Here they are saying you have no business to even think of ownership of land. What is your job? Your job is as caretakers only. Now what does caretaker mean? I won't go into that, but I just want to say, I just want to give you the parameters of the imagination that comes to you when you're living with living things. First, your time cycle changes. You are not talking of a yearly cycle that happens in the financial year. You're talking of a 48-year time cycle, which is divided into units which are of 2 lunar cycles. So you move from one cultivation plot to another in 2 lunar cycles, not in 1 lunar cycle. So imagine your time unit is not one year, which is 365 days. That's very arbitrary. We can always change time to different measures that we want to. So their time scale is 2 lunar years. And what kind of mindset would have 2 lunar years as a scale to plan daily activities is something that we have to imagine. Unless we go there, the only way to do it is to imagine it. What else does it do? An average Adivasi keeps in mind at least 10 life cycles in his head. At least 10. Otherwise he cannot live in a forest. Which root is ready to eat at what time of the year? Which tree has fruited last year? Which tree is going to fruit next year? How many times can I take harvest from this plant? Number of plants that he has to use either through food gathering or through any other way. Each of these time cycles is in his head. And these time cycles vary from annual to generational. When they make their gods, they make them from trees. And these gods are never made again unless the wood dies. Right? And they have to have that particular tree from which this god is made for the god to exist. They have to keep a time cycle of that tree and of this god. This is the other time cycle that they live. What this time cycle means is that the span of observation, the unit of observation is more than a generation. The unit of observation is not time clock. I observe a plant only when it is ripe. That's what modern botanists do. They will observe a plant over one generation. And the result of that observation is an Adivasi can identify a plant just from the smell of the smoke, just from the look of a burnt wood, just from the look of a broken twig. Modern botanists can't do it. They just can't do it. It also means that the space that they have for observation is to the same scale as the time they are able to observe. And what happens in that space is something that I'll tell you now. And I think there are some interesting stories that you may find fascinating. This is now about medicine. Having said all this as a background, now we can discuss actually what Adivasi medicine is all about. And I will begin by a few examples in order to draw your attention to what we are going to engage with. In one of my trips with my friends, I was carrying an axe and I didn't know how to hold the axe. So I put the axe and sat on it. The axe, I got up and the axe moved around and scooped out this much of flesh from my upper thigh. And this was mid-monsoon. It got infested, there was pus, and I was feverish, and I couldn't walk. An old man comes, looks at me, asks me to wait, goes to the next door forest, brings a bark, chews it, fixes it there, and in 5 days' time I'm up and about. I'm healed. I don't have to do anything. My first question, how did you know this? My first experience of tribal medicine. Second example, a friend of mine had fever. I, as a modern man, took my temperature thermometer and I weighed 104. I said, please go to a doctor. Midsummer, he goes onto a rock, extremely hot, lies on it. I said, look, you are lying on a hot, burning rock. He said, no, that's the only way we cure a fever. 2 days later, his fever is gone. Another friend of mine, he was lying with his foot swollen this big. What had happened? He was running in the forest to chase a bear, and a bamboo this big had got into his feet from under the foot and right up to his calves like this. And he just didn't know what to do, and it was swollen like this. When I went there, it was so painful that even when I looked at it, he would shriek. So I said, look, my modern mind, come, I'll take you to the hospital, become gangrenous, you'll have to cut your leg. He says, you go. So I went, 2 days later I came back, he was walking. I said, what did you do? He said, it took me 1 day to prepare my mind, and the second day I pushed the bamboo with my thumb so that one tip could come out. It took me the whole day to push the bamboo stick out. I prepared my mind for another day. And the next day, I pulled it out. All done by himself. The pus came out, he walked to the forest, picked up some herbs, put it on that, and he was fine. Third example, a very senior shaman, the medicine man, was bitten by a snake. And he was my neighbor, I was told about this, I went and saw him, he was healing it himself. He healed himself of a poisonous snake bite in 1 month's time. And what was his principle? No water to drink. Right? He took some seeds and he used to sharpen those seeds, put it on it so that the poison can be sucked out. He was in terrible pain. But no doctors, he healed himself of a poisonous snake bite. I asked someone, how do you do all this? And it's very difficult to get the knowledge from them. And I was told that they're very, very, very secretive. And I found out it's not secrecy that they are concerned with. They are really concerned with who is worthy of this knowledge. They don't give this knowledge to any Tom, Dick and Harry because they think that the plants will get angry and they will not have the medicinal properties that they need to have. This was my first debriefing of the fact that what does a living thing actually mean? All living things have intelligence. This is the message that I get. It is for us to have the antenna and the tactility of our senses to recognize those intelligences. So he gave me a way in which he would train someone. He is walking and some young boy is walking with him. And he comes home and says, did you notice what I did? He said, no. Went again. He still didn't notice. I said, what did you do? He took me aside and said, while I was walking, I put my toe on one plant. And I wanted him to see what I had done. That man did not notice and he failed the examination. That is the precision and the alertness of observation that is required for you to learn the skills. There are a few tests that the shamans perform in order to understand whether you are alert, whether you can absorb, whether you are ready to take or not. My last example, I think, which is the most important example of all. And the conclusion of the example is that Adivasis know the relationship between moonlight and plants. Modern science does not know this. I have tried very hard to find out from scientists what is the relationship between moonlight and plants. I have got no answer. I have searched journals, I have found no research paper. The only research paper I found was somebody said the only way you can study this is to convert the intensity of light into some kind of figure, reproduce that light or that intensity or wavelength in the laboratory and then see how it behaves. It doesn't work. How did I find this out? So I asked my friend, you have to tell me, this is not something that I will go without. So very secretly he told me, look, we have to go to a plant and ask the plant whether it is ready to come for this particular patient. I said, how do you go and talk to plants? He says, it is all to do with moonlight. Plants, you cannot talk to plants in sunlight. And why? It's a long story, but the gist of it is that the plants that you see have an individual and a collective life. This is the theory of a plant. And you need to know when is it that they are in their own active principle. That is the individual life. When they have distanced themselves from the community, not by walking away, by a certain methodology which is available in nature where all plants are into their own self-active principle, into their own being as it were. And that's the time when you go and talk to a plant. That's when the plant will talk to you. And you have to go in a certain way, you have to prepare yourself in a certain way so that you are available to the plant. And when you go to the plant will talk to you. And how does the plant talk to you? He says, through my head. How else will it talk to you? So what is it, how does this happen? So he gave me an example. He says, that when we go and settle a new place, how do you think we do it? We don't know whether a good place or a bad place. Every place is all good. There are many places which have water, which have all other facilities, but that's not enough. We have to take permission from the space. I said, what do you mean? He says, space has intelligence. And we need to know how to read that intelligence. Only when the space allows it. What does the space, allowing of space mean? That all the spirits that are living in that space, right? These spirits, we call them spirits, but they are actually called shadows. All the shadows that are living. Who are these shadows? These are beings that don't have a bodily existence. So there are beings with bodily existence and a shadow, like us and like trees, and there are beings without bodily